As the most important tool in a chef's toolkit, basic knowledge of knife sharpening and maintenance is a great thing to understand. Most kitchens I've worked in have some sort of house knife and some basic sharpening equipment, and they've usually seen better days. Been knocking around in a drawer for years and were either bought when the restaurant opened or were left by previous employees because they weren't particularly liked or cared for. There are also knife companies who will loan knives to a kitchen operation and come through every week or so to trade them out for freshly sharpened knives. These services are great for kitchens like Denny's, Applebee's, or huge operations like casinos, hotels, and sports arenas. But the knives these services use are almost always gigantic, hard to wield, and cheaply made. So they aren't really out much when they have to grind them down to a nub to get them sharpened or to prolong the life as much as possible. A lot of these companies also offer to sharpen the personal knives of the employees who work in the kitchens they service. This is almost universally a bad idea. I've seen these services turn a French knife into a boning knife in just a couple visits. If you trust these sharpeners and can visit their facilities or know they do good work, then I would leave the decision to you as to whether or not to trust these services with your own knives. But cooks and chefs often have very specific knives for very specific jobs and invest a lot of money in these, so they typically don't have a backup to use while the sharpener has their knives. Also, some chefs and cooks develop a bond with their tools, and a certain knife quite often starts to feel like an extension of your own hand. So anything else doesn't feel right in your hand and doesn't perform as well on the cutting board. For these reasons, I believe it is extremely important for all serious professionals to know how to maintain and sharpen their own tools. Hello again, and welcome to the Hospitable You Introduction to the Culinary Arts video series. Lesson number 5, Kitchen Knives, Metals, and Sharpening. I'll be your host for this series, Chef Jack. First, we'll talk about Western-style knives and the steel they are made from. Germany is by far the most well-known European knife-making country, with Wüsthof, Zwillig, J.A. Henkel's, and Messermeister brands all located in Solingen, Germany, easily making that the kitchen knife-making capital of Europe. Wüsthof and Zwilling, usually just referred to as Henkel's, are probably the biggest and most respected names in Western-style kitchen knives. Certainly the most well-known, but not the only. Victorinox in Eibach, Switzerland is a well-known name, and their Forstner line is another, if lesser quality company and product line that are really well-known in professional kitchens. Every knife maker has a metal alloy composition that it tightly guards, maybe more than one, and these alloys are the driving force behind the knife's performance, weight, ease of maintenance, and edge retention. For the most part, knife steel falls into a few well-defined categories. Stainless steel and high carbon steel are by far the most widely used, and there are some companies making hybrid steels to try and take advantage of the best of both. These are usually marketed as high carbon stainless or stainless super steel. The stainless part of stainless steel refers to how easily it will rust, which is to say, not very easily at all. A heavy dose of chromium in the alloy sees to that. Carbon steel blades rust and patina very easily, however. So why use them at all? While stainless blades do not rust and therefore don't really require any maintenance to prevent that, just don't leave them soaking in bleach and they'll probably never rust. The steel is also softer, so it will require more frequent sharpening. Carbon steel blades might rust faster, but because the metal is harder, they can take and maintain a finer, sharper edge for longer, but also because the metal is harder, it takes more effort to get that edge on them in the first place. So that's the big trade-off in knife steel. Easier to maintain, never rusts, requires more frequent sharpening, or harder steel that takes more time to sharpen, but holds a thinner, finer, sharper edge for longer, but rusts if you look at it sideways. It's worth mentioning here that the hardness can be measured on the Rockwell scale for determining the hardness of any material. There are different scales for different materials, but for metals, to give you a frame of reference, a very soft metal like axe heads come in around 50 Rockwell. Stainless steel can vary between 52 and 56, and the Japanese carbon steel blades tend to come in around 61 to 62. Some stainless super steel custom knife makers harden their steel to around 63. These can get really pricey really fast though. My personal collection of Western style blades is mostly Henkel's, but with a few Wüsthof pieces thrown in and a big Forstner as a beater knife. Before we go any further, let me draw your attention to the links in the description. The first one is an exhaustively detailed blog post from 2003 that is essential reading for anyone looking to understand and get good at, obsess over, maintaining high performance edges on your tools. Go read that after watching this video. I have it saved as a text file, so I never lose it to the fickle gods of the internet ever taking it down. So, German steel is softer than it probably could stand to be, but maintenance is easier and they don't really rust unless you actively try to make them. Not a bad trade-off really, if you're looking for reliability, longevity, and as long as you learn the idiosyncrasies of your knives and they feel good in your hand. The next thing you need to be aware of is the factory edge. They are almost always way too blunt. This is not an insurmountable obstacle though, not by a long shot. First, we need to explore some geometry in order to understand what will work best and what to avoid depending on what type of knife you're using. Every blade is designed with a specific function in mind, and the edge angle you choose to put on your knife will play a huge role in how well it performs. Most factory edges are grounded around a 30-degree angle on each side. If you look on a protractor at 30 degrees and then realize the other side is grounded at that same angle, you have a 60-degree included angle on the edge of your knife. Essentially, the factory edge is a baseball bat. You are now ready to go forth and pummel unsuspecting livestock. The good news is you can fix this with maths! So for an all-purpose chef's knife, I try to sharpen to about 22 degrees per side. To establish this, you can either get ultra nerdy and pack a protractor in your knife bag, guaranteeing every cook around you points and laughs, or you can fold a piece of paper. If a cut piece of paper has a 90-degree angle on its corner, like ticket printer paper, then fold the top down so the top edge lines up with one of the side edges. Now you have a 45-degree angle. You see where I'm going with this? Fold one more time and you should have something like a 22.5-degree angle. Regardless of accuracy, it's pretty close to the angle we're looking for. Now lay that folded paper angle on the sharpening stone and use this as a guide. Lay the blade on top of this with the edge of the blade on the stone and get to know the feel of that angle in your hand. Keep using the paper folding trick each time you sharpen your knives until you are confident that you can hit that same angle free-handed. Now for a blade that doesn't have much cutting board contact or chopping duties and or does a lot of fine carving work, butchery of smaller animals or smaller parts of animals like slicers and boners, quiet back there, you're going to want a finer angle. For those blades I usually go with a 25 to 30 degree included angle, so I sharpen somewhere between 12 and 15 degrees per side. A lot of kitchens have a Tristone, which is a big bar with 3 different stones of different grit finenesses mounted to it. So you can start off with a coarse grit to grind off more metal so most of the heavy lifting is done, a medium grit to get a finer edge, and a fine grit to sharpen and polish that edge. These are usually designed to be soaked in oil that acts as a lubricant and to wash away any excess amounts of metal dust and sludge. The most important thing about these stones is to remember to use mineral oil. If you use canola or olive oil, I've seen this done, the oil will go rancid and possibly contaminate your tools. Steeling is also important for Western knives. Metal does relax a bit and cause duller blades if a knife hasn't been used in a while. And even if it has been used or sharpened recently, proper steeling keeps the edge in peak performance. I steel my Western knives every time I remove them from my bag to use them. Now, steeling and sharpening are not the same thing. Sharpening is putting an edge in place. Steeling is maintaining it by working out small rolls on the edge, smoothing out any nicks, and buffing the edge into a working condition, even buffing off rough patches after sharpening. Once the edge has been rolled too many times or taken too many nicks, the metal weakens, and at this point steeling is pretty much putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. It's time to sharpen again. Japanese knives tend to be a different animal entirely. There are many Japanese knife makers making Western-style blades now, and German knife makers making Japanese-style blades as well. But the anatomy of a traditional Japanese knife is much more complex and specialized than Western styles. Knife makers like Shun are making top-quality Western-style blades with super steel that has a high Rockwell rating, while maintaining a stainless finish. And Globals are well known as knives that are lighter and all one piece of metal from pommel to point. Japanese steel, for starters, tends to be harder carbon steel. It rusts easily but takes a screaming sharp edge for longer than a Western-style knife, as long as you aren't pummeling unsuspecting livestock with them. The biggest difference, though, is in how the blades are designed. There's only one side that gets ground while sharpening, for the most part, and also unlike Western knives, the whole surface is ground down, not just a small amount near the edge. The shinogi angle on the blade is the distinct line running down the middle of the blade, distinguishing the body of the blade from the angle that leads directly to the cutting edge. The back sides of these blades are slightly convex, so when you flip the knife over to take a few passes on the stone, the only parts actually touching the stone are the edge and the spine. There are many Japanese style knives out there that have a flat surface on the back. These knives are always cheaply made machine ground garbage. Stay away, knife lover. Another thing to draw your attention to is the wavy temper line on a well-made Japanese knife. This is a visible barrier between the two different metals used in the construction of the knife. The metal at the core is tempered much harder so it can take a sharper edge, and then wrapped around that is a softer and sometimes much more stainless type of metal to reinforce the brittle metal at the core while still allowing for an edge that will cut you if you look at it wrong. And because of the right or left-handedness of these knives, the convex side is strategically on one side so that moist ingredients will fall off the blade rather than stick to it. And in case you were ever unclear on this, the Japanese truly raise obsessiveness to an art form. Also, left-handed blades will nearly cost you your other hand. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, the thickest angles you'll see on a Japanese knife is around 30 degrees. 15 to 20 degrees is common for sushi knives. Combine that with the harder core metal that can take and hold a keener edge, and you have some of the best performing knives in the world. The downsides are more time spent in maintenance and price tags that can easily range in the thousands of dollars. And not like $1,500. No. That's actually middle of the road. High quality ornate Japanese blades can run into the $6,000 to $7,000 range and up. When I was in Tokyo at the Sushi Academy, I hung out with a fellow chef from Australia a lot. Damien bought a $1,700 sashimi knife when we were in the kitchen store district. Yes, that exists. Kapabashi Street. Google that now. In class the next day, he admitted that it's kind of like giving a 16-year-old the keys to a Ferrari. He had no idea what to do with that knife, but he was very excited to figure it out, hopefully without losing any digits or limbs in the process. Anything over $1,500 though, I would say you're probably paying for a name and or the material in the handle. Not necessarily a blade that performs better than an $800 knife. My 2 cents. Most Japanese knives come from the factory and or metal shop without a functional edge. You'll need to sharpen it before you can use it. This will take a lot of time and patience, but in the end it will give you a lot of practice sharpening this style of blade. The entire shinogi surface needs to be ground down to get to the edge. Once that is complete, take 20 passes or so on the convex side to hone the edge. From then on, you shouldn't need more than 30 passes on the shinogi side and 10 passes on the back side, unless you chip the edge and have to work that out. This will effectively shorten the lifespan of your knife, so treat them with respect if you want to keep them for any length of time. Realistically, a reliable knife can last 20 to 30 years of daily use. This goes for Western style knives as well. To sharpen a Japanese blade, you will want to get the finest grit whetstone you can find, the kind that is best used when soaked in water. You will also want a stone grinder or another stone to level out the surface of the whetstone, because through use you will start to wear a rut in the stone, and if it isn't corrected on a regular basis, it will make the stone completely unusable. To use these stones, first soak them in clean water for at least a half an hour. When you no longer see very fine bubbles rising from the edges of the stone, it's probably ready. Place a damp rag or towel on a counter or stable surface and put the grinding stone on the towel off to one side. Flip the other end of the towel and place the sharpening stone on the grinding stone with the towel between them. You can even place something like a slip-proof mat under this whole setup. The idea is that you do not want the stones to slip while you are working, or you can get seriously injured. Some stones come already mounted to a base, so you can avoid some of this pageantry that way, but you still want to make sure it is as stable on the counter as you can get it. Once this is set up, you can start to sharpen your knife. Move slowly and evenly, using firm pressure starting with the flat edge of the knife. From there, move to the curved edge toward the point, and the point itself with a curved motion and a downward pressure to ensure the whole shinogi surface is in contact with the stone. Once you are satisfied with that side, flip the knife over and grind the entire length of the blade flatly on the stone using a third the amount of passes you did on the other side. During this process, a gray sludge will start to form. This is composed of metal dust you're grinding off the blade, dust from the stone, and water. Some people swear that this helps grind off more metal and make the whole process go more quickly. Others say it forms a slick between the blade and the stone, causing less contact and making the process take longer. I tend to take the latter school of thought. A similar sludge builds up on the oil stones used on Western knives, and I do think it helps in that case, but the grit used in water stones is finer, and it will get to a point where you can't feel the friction while grinding as the blade slides effortlessly across the stone. I really doubt this is getting anything accomplished at this point. When I start to notice the blade sliding like that, I will rinse the stone and keep going. My first sushi sensei would set up his stone directly under very slowly running water, so this buildup never occurred. Very serious Japanese chefs sharpen their knives at the end of each day. If you sharpen at the beginning of the day, the freshly ground metal can impart a metallic taste to foods like sashimi, so the end of the day is best. If you open your bag at the beginning of the day and you find rust spots because you failed to thoroughly dry your knives, there is an extremely easy solution. Rust erasers. They're inexpensive and they work exactly like a pencil eraser. Seriously, I'm not even kidding here. Link to products and demos in the description. One thing you never want to do with a high quality Japanese blade is use a steel. These knives are not designed like Western knives, and the metal is far too brittle to handle rough contact like this. You absolutely will end up chipping your edge horribly. I learned this the hard way, and I'm still working out a couple chips years later. Just don't do it. If the knife is dull, go back to the stone. A steel will destroy the edge of a carbon steel blade. I mentioned a stone grinder before, also known as a stone flattener, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Another stone used to flatten the sharpening surface of your whetstone so you don't end up with this. You just place the whetstone in a sink on top of a towel, run water over it continuously, and grind it down while leaning into it with the whole weight of your torso. If that sounds exhausting, it can be, especially if you don't keep up on it and this happens. You'll probably hear a lot of chatter about stone grit too. Which grit ratings are best for what knives, and the best fine grit stones for getting a shiny, polished, razor-sharp edge. The fact is, every manufacturer of whetstones uses a different grading system. There is absolutely no consistent, reliable standard among them. So beware claims and mail-order stones. This is really something you want to lay hands on before buying, as are knives in general. I bought a flashy Shun sashimi knife online, and it turned out to be way heavier than I would have liked. I still have it and use it when I need to, but I would like it to be a thinner, lighter blade. Before we end this video, we need to talk about the most dangerous type of knife to use. the type that is absolutely the most likely to cause injury, and that is a dull knife. Some people are afraid of a knife that is so screaming sharp it glides through anything you wave it at. As long as you respect the tool and do not fear it, this is precisely what you want. A dull blade is much more likely to glance, bounce, or slide off of ingredients and directly into your fingers. So keep your knives well maintained at all times, and the only injury you're likely to get is when you try to show off and twirl your knife like a pistol in a western, and it flies straight down, skewering your foot to the floor. So maybe don't do that either. And now it's time for the Focus on Food Safety. This time we're looking at dealing with cuts in the kitchen. Even the most experienced cook cuts themselves once in a while. I got 6 stitches from trying to pry apart frozen slider patties with a knife once, and it slipped and stabbed right into my left index finger. I was 32. Remember, I started in this industry at 16. Shit happens. If you do cut yourself, there are some important things to know and do immediately. Know where the first aid kit in the kitchen is. Frankly speaking, not all kitchens have them, or even keep them in functional condition. Most of the time they end up containing only finger cuts, maybe, and tape. Maybe some burn cream or sani wipes, a dusty strip of gauze if you're lucky. Failing that, go immediately to a sink and wash it out to minimize the chance of infection. If you are cutting meat, fish, or poultry, use soap to sanitize the wound as effectively as possible, grab some paper towels, and get the bleeding to stop. If it's a small nick that won't require stitches, put a Band-Aid and a finger cut on it. Improvise with masking tape and paper towels if you don't have Band-Aids. I've done this more times than I can count. And just be sure to wear a glove on that hand for the rest of the night if you aren't on a station that requires that already. Clean and sanitize your entire work area immediately after you've cleaned yourself up and gotten things under control. Change out cutting boards, clean and sanitize work surfaces, and throw out any food on said cutting boards that you were working on when you cut yourself. Anything that might have been in the path from where it happened to the sink needs to be inspected, cleaned, and sanitized if needed. If it's bad enough to require stitches, you won't have to worry about a lot of this because you'll be on the way to the clinic while your coworkers clean up for you. Everyone has done it at least once. Everyone has seen it happen multiple times. It's just an occupational hazard. And if it's not bad enough to require stitches, expect a lot of poking and reaming from your coworkers. If it is bad enough to need stitches, get back to the kitchen when you're finished at the clinic, even if it is just to clean up at the end of your shift. Your coworkers will respect you way more and give you far less grief for stabbing yourself. Next time we will be looking at different kitchen appliances that you will find in a professional kitchen. We will talk about the characteristics of different types of pots, pans, different materials they're made of, and how that affects their performance, as well as burners and how those affect performance. We will take a look at some of the newer large appliances like combi ovens, pizza ovens, grills, smokers, and steamers, and how some of the newer model ovens can do many of those functions in a single unit. We will finish that lesson up with a look at catering and banquet equipment like steam wells, chafing dishes, and hot boxes, some of which appear regularly in restaurant kitchens too. So I'll see you next time. Hospitable You is produced by Hospitable Productions LLC and all of the people listed here. If you want to help keep Hospitable You free for everyone, please consider donating to our PayPal or become a patron on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping us create a more hospitable you.